Freedom. It was the only word that described the feeling. I stood outside the double doors of the courthouse and smiled up at the sky. It was a dreary gray, but for me, it felt like a bright blue. I breathed deeply, symbolically sucking in the court-ordered end of my private nightmare. My life was mine again. It would no longer involve lawyers, judges, and hatred. For 4 years, battle after battle, my ex dragged me through a divorce war. We had originally parted ways with the idea of splitting everything down the middle because her salary was comparable to mine. It was her lawyer who found the arrangement unacceptable. My lawyer convinced me to go thermonuclear over it. In the end, I ended up with a quarter, she with another quarter. It was the lawyers who ended up with half. Financially, it would have been better to give in at the beginning. There was a time when hate was not a word I used. Now, I hated Linda Barrow. I would have shouted it from the rooftops if it would have ended the legal roller coaster. In my mind, I renamed her Witch Barrow. I could only imagine what she called me. The 4 years took a large toll from my soul. I was thankful there were no children. We had come close once. A miscarriage I thought a curse at the time. Now, a blessing. To drag a child through it all would have created monstrous therapist bills and pain that would never go away. 9 years of marriage, 4 of it fighting a divorce, gone to waste. It was difficult to remember how we once felt when we thought we would conquer the world together. I had been replaced with we, and now back to I. Women were off my list, at least for the foreseeable future. I dated once during the separation, and it turned out badly. I had thought she knew I was in the middle of divorce. She had thought me unmarried and more than mind. Hate was the word she used. It struck deep and scared me off the dating scene. It was an easy thing to forego. I sucked at dating. As I neared my car, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Carl, a good friend. One of my true compatriots who suffered with me these last 4 years. He hated Witch Barrow almost as much as I. Intellectually, I knew it was more of dislike on his part, but he spoke hate for my benefit and I loved him for it. "Are you Barrowless?" Carl asked when I said hello. Completely and legally, I answered with a swagger in my voice. I had not felt this happy in years. It was almost worth the 4 years of hell. Strip club, meat market, sports bar. You pick, and I'll drink the memories away with you, Carl offered. He sounded as happy as I. There was nothing I wanted more that moment. Sports. I need a friend and alcohol. It will be a few months before I can look at a woman without frowning. Of course, I was exaggerating, but I truly needed a testosterone night. There was a hockey game tonight. A few craft beers, and some zealous cross-checking fit my mood. I wanted to forget the last 4 years. Forget Witch Barrow. Sounds good. We'll catch the Blues game, Carl agreed. I'll leave work early and meet you at McGinney's at 5. We'll eat crap, try a new brew, and screw the past. I loved how he put things when he was in the mood to let go. I had a few fair-weather friends, but Carl was my anchor when the shit hit the fan. There was no problem that a night out with him wouldn't ease. 5 it is. The line went dead as I knew it would. Goodbyes were just not his thing. I drove home and grabbed some jeans and a gray pullover sweater to replace my suit. "My man, Damon," Carl yelled from across the bar. He was in jeans with a Blues hockey jersey. The numbers were fading, it being a long-time, often-worn favorite of his. I could tell he left work really early because he had a half-empty glass in front of him and another completely empty one next to it. I smiled at his demeanor and waved my fist in the air. Carl was exactly what I needed tonight. I reached the table just as a waitress, somewhat cute and way too young, brought 2 tall glasses of a dark beer. I guess the empty glass was, at one time, originally for me. Carl shook off my wallet. "The night is on me," he said, ripping a 20 out of a thick money clip. "Come on, Carl," I said, trying to feign insult. "I have no intention of drinking all night on your dollar." "Round for round then," Carl answered. "I'll get the first." He handed the waitress the money before I could disagree. It was going to be good night. Carl was not the person you would want to see at a funeral or any other solemn affair. He was too loud and insisted everyone knew he was there. When I wanted to party, he was my go-to guy. He was too big for anyone to voice disapproval of and too nice to dislike. Above all, he was boisterous. Hockey was a good sport for him. All the fans were loud. After a few beers, I was loud with him. The tables next to us became loud as well. They all became Carl tables. I met Edith and Ralph Wilkerson, Frank and Bob, and 2 rather butch-looking older women named Mary and Thelma. We became a small party zone, and our cheerleader, Carl, kept us going as if we were on the ice itself. Bad calls were his favorite, unless it was against the opposing team. I found myself, as I fully expected, joining in his complaints and high-fiving around the party zone when we scored. Carl only spilled one beer that night. A miracle if there ever was one. The man could not speak without waving his arms around. Tall beer glasses were just asking to get dumped. I was wearing some of the beer on my leg. It was pretty wet, but not so much I wanted to leave. We stayed well after the game ended. How does it feel to be single again? Carl asked as ESPN took over the screens, showing some soccer game from the other side of the planet. Like a huge weight has been lifted, I said, taking a long draw of some wheat beer. I lost count of how many we had had. I had no idea what the name of the brew in my glass was anymore. It was sweet after all the dark beer we had chewed our way through. It didn't matter. I would finish it anyway. That's why I never married, Carl said, tapping his glass against mine. I wasn't going to point out the obvious to him. He has been living with a woman, Deborah, for over 6 years. They were married in all but the legal sense. She let him have a night out every week, knowing he wouldn't stray much past stuffing a few dollars in a stripper's G-string. I took another sip of my beer, wondering how you find such a tolerant woman. Linda was never tolerant, that was for sure. I shook my head to remove Linda from my brain. I was supposed to be forgetting her. You sure you don't want to run to the east side and throw some dollars away? Carl asked. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted an excuse to go stuff some G-strings. Next time, I answered. Linda had sucked that desire out of me. I felt guilty not repaying his favor of celebrating my divorce. I just wouldn't appreciate it tonight. I just want to sit here and forget the last 4 years. I waved the waitress over. The beer in my glass only had a few minutes left. What's the next one on the list? I asked the waitress. You guys went through all 10, she answered. Unless you want to start on the lights. I looked at Carl and his eyebrows raised. We don't drink piss, we said in unison. We laughed. An old joke between us that was lost on our waitress and anyone else in the world who wasn't us. I knew we had had too much to drink, so we did the only thing we could do. We'll just start at the top again, I said, and Carl smiled and tipped his empty glass to me. The waitress rolled her eyes and headed off to get us another pair of brown dead eyes. I was feeling no pain. I don't want to hate her anymore, I slurred slightly to Carl when we were halfway through the list the second time. My mind was functioning slowly, but my emotions seemed real enough. It's over, Carl agreed. Let her go. You shouldn't hate anyone. I think that was Carl's whole philosophy on life. Don't hate anyone. But I still don't like her. Nah, she dragged you through the mud, Carl agreed. Just don't hate her. It's not her fault she's a witch. I lost it there. A fit of laughing took over and Carl joined in. I tried to stop when it struck me that Linda probably had a friend telling her it wasn't her fault because I was an a-hole. That brought on a private bout of laughing. I had definitely had too much to drink. It was Carl who made my stupor happy instead of sullen. It was sad, really. Linda and I had loved each other once. There was no reason, but human idiocy, to move to hate. Some strange desire to find fault not our own, and in time, making it our own. No, I would not hate Linda, the witch barrow. I would move to indifference. It was over and hate would only hurt me more than her now. Carl, I said with drunken truth, I love you, buddy. We clinked glasses, and for some reason they didn't break. We definitely hit them hard enough. I drained my glass and ordered water. It was time for a little detox. I thought carefully about getting into my car. I had stopped drinking almost an hour ago and was fully hydrated. I walked a straight line when no one was looking and didn't stumble. I probably shouldn't have gotten behind the wheel, but I didn't feel impaired. I had no trouble selecting the unlock button by feel on the key fob. Having to struggle to unlock the car was usually the sign that indicated my mind was off. I started the car, pulled out my phone and synced with the onboard. I rolled through a bunch of songs until I found Jewel. Sometimes you just need a sweet voice to soothe you. Her voice always left me craving more, like a book you wished wouldn't end. She filled my car with sweetness as AI backed out of the parking slot and entered traffic. Carl had fixed me again. My heart was lighter, and with the end of the divorce, I felt excited about the future. I turned down Travis Street, going west, and passed my next turn. I had a desire to just drive and let the music fill me. I wrapped myself in the private little world of my car, my mouth moving in sync with the words of "You were meant for me." So much for testosterone. I smiled at the irony. I missed the green at Garnet Road, a rather long light. I stopped and closed my eyes for a moment to fully enjoy the song. Jewel ended, and the randomizer screwed up and started Magic Carpet Ride. Not what I desired at the moment. I needed a mood phone, one that could sense that Steppenwolf was not what I needed. I looked down at my phone to readjust the selection list. I was thrown forward, hard. The sound of crushing metal vibrated through me as my seatbelt cut hard into my chest. My forehead clipped the steering wheel before I realized what happened. My car was now half into the intersection and a dark SUV, its left headlight and grille caved in, was sitting on my rear end. My head hurt and Steppenwolf was still blaring. Shit. I turned off the engine and engaged the hazard lights. I stumbled out of the car. My head was swimming through molasses. The light was green. That from the voice of woman. I blinked long to get my bearing. She hit me, I thought. Your tail lights were out, she added. There was nothing wrong with my tail lights. I walked to the back of the car and both were a shattered mess. The SUV had come up over the top of my bumper and caved in the trunk. The vehicles were conjoined, and the left wheel of the SUV was an inch or so off the pavement. There was nothing wrong with my lights, I said, trying to remain calm. The tail lights were both out now, smashed beyond recognition. Only the left rear blinker seemed to be working. They were out and the light was green, the lady insisted. I looked up into her scrunched-up eyebrows. Her nostrils were flared and her lips were curved down. I had seen the expression before. She must have taken witch-barrow lessons. She moved her hands to her hips, daring me to disagree again. Look, it was an accident, I stated. You don't need to dump it all on me. That's what insurance is for. It was a neutral statement. For years of which city and a guy becomes wary of entering unnecessary wars. Her nose moved strangely, and I saw a sly smile form. You smell like a brewery, she said as if it was some kind of victory. It was the damn drink Carl spilled. I took a step back. I couldn't imagine it was that potent. It happened over an hour ago. Some beer spilled on my pants. I defended myself, pointing down my leg. We'll just call the cops and see how this plays out. She pulled her phone from her front pocket and began dialing. She stalled on the last number and looked up to me. The light was green and your tail lights were out. I sighed. Fine, I said, not confident I could pass a breathalyzer test. That's what insurance was for anyway. She canceled the call. Boxers or briefs? She asked me. I looked at her and tried to decipher what type of insanity had claimed her. Maybe I just attracted women who like to torture men. What? Do you wear boxers or briefs? She repeated, enunciating every word as if I didn't speak English. Her short blonde hair jerked back and forth with every word, as if she needed more emphasis. Are you nuts? I asked. Her car was mounting mine. The damage would be in the thousands. She had successfully blackmailed me into taking the blame, and now she wanted to survey my underwear. I was the one who had been drinking, so why did she sound stoned? Suit yourself, she said as she rolled her eyes at me. God, I hated when Linda rolled her eyes at me. It felt worse from this woman, and I didn't even know her. She began to move back to her SUV. Why the hell do you care about my choice of underwear? I called out, my hand waving in disgust. She turned to me with her hand on the driver's side door. The cops are coming whether I call them or not, she stated with boredom, using an insulting "you're an idiot" tone. If they're boxers, you can toss your jeans in my car. We keep this as a simple accident that way. She opened the door, reached in and pulled out a small black purse. I heard sirens in the background. She had done this before. Are you setting me up? I asked. Maybe some kind of insurance scam. More rolled eyes as she pulled her license from her purse. Look, she stalled, letting her arms drop to her sides. If this is my fault, I'll lose my license for 6 months or worse, and my insurance will likely drop me. If it's yours, I live to drive another day. She shrugged her shoulders. Accidents were not new to her. The sirens were getting closer. They are going to smell what I smelled, she added, shaking her head like she was trying to get a 2-year-old to figure it out for himself. I emptied my pockets onto the hood of my car and removed my jeans. Embarrassingly, I was wearing Ghostbusters boxers. They had been a gag gift from Linda some time ago. I had no idea why I still had them, but I had a strange affinity to the movie. I hadn't planned on stripping in the street. Nice. The woman smiled. I would have preferred the eye roll. I handed her my jeans, which she promptly threw over the seat into the back of her SUV. You were on your way out for late-night tacos, she said as if an alibi was second nature to her. You threw on a sweater and headed for the drive-thru. I nodded. Damon Richardson, I introduced myself, Ghostbusters fan. I got a chuckle out of her at least. It was better than the eye roll. Rebecca Morrison, she responded. And the movie wasn't that good. She obviously had bad taste in movies. I could see flashing lights, so I grabbed my wallet and keys off the hood and threw my phone in the front seat. Do you always blackmail your victims, Rebecca? I asked, trying to maintain some humor in my voice. It was easy. I was in the middle of Dark Street wearing Ghostbusters underwear. Thank God they didn't glow in the dark. Sorry, I have no choice. You don't look like you have a string of priors to worry about. Priors? I was hoping she was talking about accidents. She was awfully cool about handling the situation. She retrieved a mint from her purse and handed it to me. I popped it in my mouth. She seemed prepared for every contingency. I was wondering why I didn't hate her. I should. She was screwing up my night fairly well. The police car pulled up behind us, light spinning, illuminating my underwear. Our cars were blocking the lane and protruding into the intersection. Someone had called since we were an obvious hazard. Anyone hurt? The officer asked loudly from behind his door, one foot still in the car. We both shook our heads and said no. I'll be with you in a moment, he stated and ducked into his car and shut the door. You'll need your registration, Rebecca said as she leaned into the cab of her SUV. Her jeans were awfully tight, and she wore them well. I admired the view for a moment before the idiocy of it struck me. I was admiring the rear of a woman who was dumping her crap on me. I shook off the image and moved to retrieve my vehicle registration. The officer was making us wait. I assumed he was clearing Rebecca's license plate since mine was buried under the SUV. I leaned against the trunk of my poor car and waited. So, you drink a lot on weekdays? Rebecca asked as she moved closer to me. I assumed she felt as exposed as I did in the rolling police lights. I wasn't sure if I wished to share my life with her. I didn't peg her as a nice person, but I was a little exhausted with disliking people. It was a celebration of sorts, I answered. I usually don't drink much at all. I gave her too much information. Birthday? Rebecca continued with a soft smile. It was the smile that pissed me off. It was fairly attractive and disarming. The defenses I had been practicing for 4 years kicked in. Nice was just her cover. Look, I replied with more strictness than needed. We're not going to be friends. You're screwing me over pretty well. Just be happy I'm not fighting it. Her face looked like I had just slapped it. Her eyes shifted quickly away from mine. She hesitantly took a step back, then turned and walked quickly back to her vehicle. She leaned against it, facing away from me. I convinced myself Rebecca did it to herself. Then I convinced myself I was an a-hole. Then I remembered she rear-ended me and blackmailed me into taking the blame. Then again, I probably should have called a cab from the bar. She did hide my jeans for me, but she lied about the tail lights. I had no idea if the light was green. I was looking at my phone. I settled on the smile. No woman would smile like that unless she was trying to pull one over on me. I assigned her 90% culpability, and I accepted 10% as an a-hole. At least she would know I wasn't a complete sucker. The officer climbed out of his squad car and donned a Stetson. He titled it forward, then adjusted it slightly left and right. I sensed he was rather full of himself. He came forward toward Rebecca, so I began to approach. Stay with your vehicle, sir, the officer commanded with his hand raised. I will speak with her first. I didn't like the idea of Rebecca talking without me. The story would get garbled between us. That, and I had kind of told her to screw off. I wondered if a sobriety test was in my future. The officer and Rebecca had what I considered a rather long conversation. I couldn't hear any of it, but I did see her gesturing to me in my car, then pointing down the street. She nodded a few times and shook her head in response to some questions. I saw what looked like pleading, then resignation set it. She turned away from the officer and put her hands behind her back. She looked over to me and mouthed, "I'm sorry," as cuffs found her wrists. I had never seen someone I knew get arrested before. I started moving forward, but was held back by the officer again. "Stay with your vehicle, sir. I will be with you in a moment." He led Rebecca back to his car and placed her safely into the back seat. I figured I was next. She must have mentioned the beer. Why else would she be sorry? But why would he arrest her? I stood in the road, like an idiot, in my Ghostbusters boxers. "Mr. Richardson?" the officer queried as he approached me, reading my name off his notebook. "Yes. I am going to need to see your license, registration, and proof of insurance," the officer stated. He pulled a metal clipboard in front of him, accepted my documents, and placed them under the clip. "I should be able to give you a report in 15 minutes and get you on your way. There are tow trucks on the way." He walked to the front of my vehicle to get my license plate number. "Why did you arrest Ms. Morrison?" "She's operating on a restricted license," the officer said, never looking up from his clipboard. "To and from work only." He moved forward with a flashlight to read my VIN number through the windshield. "She will be charged with reckless driving for this accident. That and violating her court restrictions puts her in the felony category." He looked up at me. "Sit tight for a few moments while I run your information, and I'll get you a copy of my accident report for your insurance company. You don't want my side of the accident?" "It won't be necessary," the officer responded. Ms. Morrison has taken full responsibility for it. Texting while driving causes more of these than you know." He shrugged his shoulders and headed back to his vehicle. He stopped halfway and turned. "I would like to know what you're doing in your underwear." "Ah, I had a taste for tacos." I fumbled. "I was just going to go through the drive-thru. Didn't figure I would get in an accident." "No one ever does." He nodded with a half grin and continued on his way. I looked at the police car, but was unable to see Rebecca inside. I realized I had hurt her when I snapped at her questions. I was feeling guilty she was taking responsibility. Damn it, she was responsible. The smile was real though. I knew that now. She could have played the DUI card on me. She had the gall to apologize. 10% her fault, 90% pure a-hole for me. I should have just driven straight home. The tow trucks arrived, 2 large flatbeds with winches to pull the vehicles aboard. I watched as the 2 drivers separated the vehicles by bouncing themselves on my rear bumper. Somehow I had figured it would have been a more technical solution. I retrieved my phone from the car before Ralph, the driver to the truck that would take my car, pulled it onto the flatbed. When both vehicles were loaded, they did a quick sweep up of the street to collect the shattered remnants. The officer returned just as the tow truck drivers were finishing. Here is a copy of the initial report. Ms. Morrison's contact information, insurance, and contact information for the owner of the SUV. I have stapled my card on the top if there are any issues. She doesn't own the vehicle? No, the officer answered. I don't have the insurance details on the vehicle yet. He handed me my license, registration, and insurance card. What's going to happen to her? I asked, gesturing to his vehicle with my head. Ms. Morrison will be taken to county, the officer responded. She'll spend the night and probably post bail in the morning. I felt horrible. I knew I shouldn't, but I did. I misinterpreted the smile. I had to try to forget. It wasn't my fault she rear-ended me. Why did I feel so guilty about her going to jail? It was the Barrow effect. I had assumed she was a witch like my ex. Now all I saw was desperation followed by surrender. I made her surrender. I would have felt better about myself if she would have remained a witch. Then, at least, I wouldn't blame myself for the accident I didn't cause. Ralph drove me and my car back to his garage business. It was a small shop with a large fenced-in yard containing a dozen wrecked vehicles, all in a line. Mine extended the line. I called my insurance company while he unloaded, and I arranged for a rental for the next day. Carl, red-eyed and sleepy, picked me up and drove me home. He found my state of dress very humorous and worth the trip out in the dead of night. I was sure the story would be repeated loudly for many years to come. It was nearly lunchtime. I had been in meetings all morning and could barely keep my focus. Not that many meetings needed focus. Lately, most of our gatherings at work were to allow people to tout their current achievements and feign the need for input. This morning, I actually attended a meeting to schedule more meetings. Thus was my life at Bradford Insurance and Casualty. I was paid well to design and optimize databases, mostly query optimization, a topic that always thrilled at parties. The work had become easy over the years, almost non-thinking. I was good at it and found it like riding a bike. It was everyone else's ignorance of the subject that allowed me a nice bi-weekly income. There were only 2 things in my life that disturbed my comfortable tedium. One was driven by the witch. No, cross that off, Linda Barrow. That was over now. The other was the accident of the previous night. It had my mind drifting during the meetings. I still was not sure how to measure my a-holeness. I was unable to force myself to accept none of it was really my fault. Rebecca brought it on herself. Every time I thought about it being her fault, I'd see her smile. I thought it a con used by a smart woman, but it had warmth, not malice, in it. Her lips mouthing sorry at me. I had hurt her more than she had hurt my car. I returned to my cubicle and caved into my own self-wrought guiltiness. I found the number for the county lockup online and, after 3 aborted attempts, punched in the number. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I needed to know Rebecca was okay. Most likely, I would never see her again anyway. County Corrections, how may I help you? The voice was more pleasant than I expected. For some reason, I expected a depressed-sounding voice, something akin to sticky misery. Hi, I said as I tried to collect my thoughts. I had never called a prison before. I am calling about Rebecca Morrison. I heard some keyboard work. How may I help you, sir? The kind voice asked again. I wasn't sure. Why did I call? I wanted to make sure Ms. Morrison had made bail, I replied. I guess that is what concerned me. I wanted to make sure everything was not as grim as it appeared last night. No, sir, the voice responded. Ms. Morrison is still here with us. Crap. Why did I call? It made me feel worse, not better as I had intended. I sighed and decided to sink deeper into the quagmire. May I speak with her? I can take a message to her, sir. The voice was practiced at these requests. She will have to return your call. I wasn't sure she would return my call. No, thank you, I replied and hung up. I took a deep breath and stared out my window. A phenomenal view of the parking lot greeted my eyes, though I didn't really see any of it. It took me 7 years to wrangle a cubicle next to a window, and now I just took it for granted. It wasn't my fault, I told myself as I stood. This is really stupid, I said under my breath, to myself as I entered my car. I'm a stupid idiot, I reminded myself, out loud, as I pulled into the county lockup. I would like to post bail for Rebecca Morrison, I told the clerk at the gated window. The waiting room, if that is what it was filled with plastic chairs they must have sourced from the DMV. They were lined up in 2 rows, as if there would be a lot of people waiting. I was the sole person. The clerk pointed to a door off to the side and pushed a button under his counter. A buzzer sounded, the lock clicked and I opened the door without instruction. Cattle are trained in such ways. Like a bank, a row of teller positions, each with a next window sign, were lined up along a counter. Only one position was open, but no clerk was waiting. I walked up and waited. So much for the cordial phone conversation I had earlier. My opinion of the lockup lowered greatly. It was a few minutes before a small woman with gray hair sauntered up. May I help? The woman asked. My grandmother used to do up her hair like hers, all curly and shaped perfectly round. I suspected she spent a large portion of her government paycheck on maintaining it. I would like to post bail for Rebecca Morrison, I repeated for her benefit. The woman reached below the counter, without looking, and retrieved a form. She typed in a few things on a keyboard and nodded. Then I heard a laser printer behind her kick up. She handed me a pen and pushed the form to me. Fill in everything above this line. She pointed at a thick black line about 3/4 down the page. She retrieved the paper from the printer and returned to me. It is $3,000, cash, money order, or credit card. My heart took a little jump. I had been thinking a few hundred. I tried not to look shocked as the woman stared at me. I should have asked while I was on the phone. Of course, I responded as I retrieved my wallet from my back pocket. I handed her my credit card while trying to hold my hand steady. This was a truly stupid idea. There is a 5% non-refundable service charge on credit cards, she informed me. I noticed she took the card before she told me. I did quick math in my head. 15? No, $150, and I didn't even know if Rebecca would skip on the $3,000 to boot. I was a complete fool. I filled out the form as the woman ran my card. My hand was shaking. In my left eye had a twitch that didn't seem to want to stop. Name, address, phone number in relation to the imprisoned. I was not sure what to put on the relation line. Friend seemed inappropriate since I had clearly told her I wasn't. Certainly not family. Acquaintance seemed the most likely. Then I smiled and wrote victim. Screw it. I had to sign at the bottom to attest that I understood the bond would be forfeited if Rebecca failed to show at any of her appointed court appearances. I was committed, so I signed. The lady returned, had me sign a charge receipt, stapled it and the paper from the printer to my form. She took an official stamp, inked the bottom of the form, and signed it. She lifted the form and looked at the sheet from the printer. Please take a chair in the waiting room. She pointed to the door I had entered. Ms. Morrison will be with you shortly. She turned and walked to a small room where another clerk was busy with a pile of papers. That was the quickest $3,000 I had ever spent. I returned to the waiting room and sat on one of the plastic chairs. It was 20 minutes before a buzzer sounded, and a door farther down the room opened. Rebecca exited slowly, her eyes red, her blonde hair disheveled. She had not slept well. I stood and began to worry about what I would say. I had no good answers for why I would stupidly help her. You paid my bail? She had stopped walking and stood about 10 feet away from me. I could see concern in her eyes. Maybe she thought I expected something. It felt wrong, I answered poorly. I don't know why, but I didn't want you to spend the day in there. Her head tilted slightly as she considered what I said. You will go to court, right? I added. My $3,000 still weighed heavily on my mind. I think it was the wrong thing to ask. I saw her eyes water, and I began to rethink what I couldn't unsay. Rebecca moved toward me, her bottom lip trembling. She entered my personal space with no reservations and hugged me. Thank you for not hating me, she said. Then the floodgates opened. I could do nothing but hold her. I hadn't been anyone's shoulder in a very long time. I was out of practice. Nothing I could think of to say seemed appropriate. She was a blank slate to me, and prison didn't seem to be the only thing she cried about. Something deeper was wrong. I should not have come. She needed her own Carl. Can I give you a lift home? I asked softly. The closeness was uncomfortable, and I needed to get back to work. Rebecca wiped her eyes and broke her embrace. The absence of her arms around me was strangely disconcerting. Maybe I shouldn't have spoken quite so soon. I am sorry for last night, Rebecca admitted. Her remorse showed in her hazel eyes. I was desperate and thought. I don't know what I was thinking. I am not normally a witch. She gave me half a smile. It was a weak, non-confident smile that wrapped her apology. I wasn't at my best either, I said. My last words to you were misguided. I was doing it, apologizing to the woman who rear-ended me. I had no spine. Maybe Linda had ripped it out of me when I wasn't looking. I have to get back to work. Can I drop you somewhere? I asked again. I'm not sure, Rebecca said. Maybe my sister's. The maybe was disturbing. She must have seen the confusion in my face. I was staying with a friend. Her expression looked shy, and her cheeks reddened. That was her SUV last night. She isn't answering my calls. Homeless? I was in deeper shit than I had envisioned. Your sister's then, I said with a false smile, gesturing toward the door. The quicker I could drop her off, the better I would feel. I already did the white knight thing and had repaired my soul. It was time to exercise my spine. Rebecca smiled and led the way to the door, which I opened for her. I tried not to notice how well she filled in her jeans. I needed more backbone. Rebecca pulled out her phone and fiddled with it as we walked. Phone's dead, she informed me. Couldn't charge it last night. I smiled, anxious to get her on her way, and pulled out mine and entered my code. Thank you, she said as I handed it to her. She laughed as she tried typing in the number a few times. I don't know the last time I had to remember her number. Hard to live without your contact list, I agreed. I reached the car and unlocked the doors, opening the passenger side for Rebecca. She stalled before she entered, raising one hand up to me and the other holding the phone to her ear. I waited as she listened intently. Kathy, it's Becca. I need to stay with you for a few days. Call me as soon as you get this, Rebecca stated and hung up. She's not answering right now, she said, looking a little distraught. The feeling was mutual. Rebecca tried to hand me my phone and clipped the side of the car door with it. Her eyes went wide when it fell from her hand. It spun away from us and landed glass down on the pavement. The sound of it hitting was not pleasant. Oh no, Rebecca cried as she squatted to pick it up. I closed my eyes, knowing what the ugly sound meant. Oh no, Rebecca said again as she turned the phone over in her hand. I am so sorry. Her voice sounded choked. I opened my eyes. The glass on my new phone had a thick crack running from one corner, diagonally across the face, to the other. The upper corner had a small web of cracks to mark the original landing point. I didn't mean. She started. I know. I said way too loudly. Rebecca jerked at my tone. I know, I said more calmly. She presented the phone to me, her hand shaking. I took a deep breath and took it from her. I pushed the button and a psychedelic array of colors appeared. The screen was unreadable. I should just wait here, Rebecca said, and began to back away. I'll call my sister from inside, she said, pointing at the door we had exited from. I could see tears forming in her eyes. I felt like shit, and my phone was broken. I knew then that she was a curse. It was my own fault for thinking I owed her something this morning. No, I said quietly. I put the paperweight of a phone in my pocket. I'm not leaving you here. It was only a phone, and not the first one I have broken. I stepped to the side and gestured for Rebecca to get in. She didn't move. She looked at me with tears running down her cheeks. I know you didn't mean it. It's only a phone, I said calmly. It happens a lot, Rebecca cried. She turned and moved back toward the building, her face in her hands. Shit. I ran to catch up with her. Rebecca, come on, don't stay here. The thought of leaving her here at the prison defeated the whole purpose of bailing her out. She turned to me, her cheeks flooded with smeared tears. I broke your car and your phone, and I don't even know if I can get your jeans back. Those were my best jeans. I shook the thought out of my mind. The jeans were old, I lied. The car and phone are insured. They were just accidents. I am a walking accident, Rebecca cried. For the second time in less than 10 minutes, I let her cry on my shoulder. I held her as best I could, in the middle of the parking lot. This time, I held her better. Look, I suggested stupidly. I have to get back to work. I'll drop you at my place. I still have a landline. You can call your sister and straighten everything out. I don't know why I trusted Rebecca. She just didn't seem like she was truly dishonest. Not the way she caved when she thought I was angry with her last night. She sniffled and broke her embrace. Mine was a slower release. I'm not sure that's a good idea, Rebecca replied. She wiped her eyes and looked at me. It would be better for you if you left me here. Nope, I said truthfully. I think I would be happier if I knew you were okay and not stuck in a prison waiting room. I was already in too deep to stop now. I have to protect my investment. I smiled to soften the message. I got a small smile back. It was better than the crying. At least I was a thoughtful idiot. Okay, but just until I get hold of my sister, Rebecca agreed. I smiled again and led her back to my car. I got her seated and closed the passenger door. I walked around the car, calling myself a moron under my breath. I knew this wasn't the wisest course of action, but I kind of forced myself into it by showing up in the first place. Why did you bail me out? Rebecca asked carefully as I pulled out of the parking lot. That question had no good answer. Maybe she was as confused as I. Why did you tell the cop the truth last night? I responded with my own question. I didn't like myself after you yelled at me, Rebecca answered. Being arrested was better than having you hate me. Her honesty was surprising. I had thought she would dodge the question as I had. Why did they arrest you? The cops said you were on a restricted license, but usually they just give you a ticket or something. Rebecca looked down at her feet, and I instantly regretted asking. I was about to change the subject when she spoke. Things happen to me, Rebecca responded cryptically. I know they're my fault, like your phone. It's just not on purpose. It seems to happen a lot. She brushed imaginary dust off her jeans and absently picked at one of the leg seams. I really shouldn't drive. She looked up at me, and there was sadness in her eyes. I am so sorry about last night. Not just the accident, but trying to dump the blame on you. She sounded completely sincere. So, there are a lot of accidents, I said stupidly. My attention returned to the road. For some reason, I became more aware of my own driving. Is it okay if I don't tell you how many? Rebecca asked softly. I could feel the embarrassment in her voice. It didn't really matter how many. I was only involved with one. I shifted the subject. I was celebrating the end of my own mistake last night, I said, finally answering the question Rebecca had tried to ask last night. I looked over quickly and saw she was relieved I didn't press her about her history. A very long divorce, kind of bitter in the end. She was silent as I spoke, but her eyes were watching me. I wasn't ready for someone, especially a woman, to handle me the way you did last night. Sorry if I was a little heavy in the a-hole department. I was a witch. Rebecca's eyes went back to her jeans. I'm not a very good one. I fell apart when you told me I was. I never called you that. You were thinking it, and you were right. I looked over at her as she fiddled with jeans again. I bailed you out because I felt terrible for thinking you were a witch, I admitted. Her eyes came up to mine. I'm not very good at being an a-hole, I said as we shared a small smile. I moved my eyes back to the road. We were silent for a few minutes. My house burnt down, Rebecca said with no context. I have been living with friends, the last of which will probably never speak to me again. I looked over to her. She was looking right at me. I am not a good person to know. I wanted desperately to ask her about her house burning down. She was warning me, but it felt insulting to ask. I probably lost my job for not showing up to work today. The best thing that has happened to me in years is the guy I rear-ended bailed me out of jail. I was a little stunned at Rebecca's revelations. I wasn't sure how you respond to something like that. I thought Linda had driven my life into the dumpster, but I had been living the high life compared to Rebecca. At least I had Carl. Stupidly, I held my hand out to Rebecca. Hesitantly, she placed her hand in mine. I could use a friend as well, I said quietly. I felt her relax in her seat, her shoulders losing their stiffness. I wasn't as loud or friendly as Carl, but I could at least be present. Her hand felt good in mine. I was reluctant to remove it when I had to make a turn. I pulled into my driveway and prayed silently that my house wouldn't burn down. You have a nice home, Rebecca said as if it wasn't a good thing. She looked frightened. She was beginning to scare me. I shook it off. I wasn't going to fall into believing in luck, good or bad. She was basically a good person who had a string of bad things happen. It couldn't go on forever. My house was small, a bachelor pad in style. It was 30 years old and partially remodeled. It had an open kitchen, bordered by a counter with stools where I usually ate. Beyond the counter was a great room with a flat panel, a fireplace, and a set of eclectic, comfortable furniture. There were 2 bedrooms, one basically an office now, and a single bathroom with a shower. Off the garage was a small mudroom that housed the smallest over and under washer-dryer appliance I could find. Anything larger, and I wouldn't have been able to open the door to the garage. That is beautiful, Rebecca commented as she moved away from my pride and joy. Against the wall, opposite the flat screen, I had a large 210-gallon saltwater aquarium. It had taken me years to figure out how to deal with desalination and waste issues. Now, it was as perfect as it could get. I had given it a light blue rock bottom with natural and fake coral seemingly growing in odd directions. The fake coral created niches the smaller fish loved to hide in. It was bathed in soft light that gave the whole room a warm, bluish glow. Swimming slowly on the bottom, my lionfish sauntered along, its colorful dorsal waving slowly. The tank, and its care, is what kept me sane during the divorce. It was like a soothing movie that never stopped. My claim to fame, I said with a proud smile. That's Mufasa swimming along the bottom. Rebecca gave me a strange look. So I like cartoons, Sumi? Rebecca smiled. A very pleasing smile. I grabbed a pen and paper on the kitchen counter. I wrote down my office number and, thinking wisely, wrote down my home phone for her. Here's my office number, and this is the number here, I said as I pushed the paper toward her. I'm already late, so feel free to look around. There should be something in the fridge and clean towels in the closet next to the bathroom. Help yourself, but please call or leave a note when you leave so I know you're okay. Rebecca smiled at me and sat on a stool and looked at my note. Thank you so much, Damon. I'm glad it was you I ran into last night. It was meant well, but sounded terrible. She lost her smile and looked at me with concern. You know what I meant. If I had to run into... I know, I laughed. The feeling is mutual. There was that wonderful smile again. I'm late, I reminded her as I hurried out. Thank you, Rebecca shouted again as I left. I was late to work, driving a rental. My phone was shot and my best pair of jeans were lost. I had known her for less than a day. Why didn't I hate her? More meetings. I barely made it to the first on time, and another had been added to my schedule during lunch. At least the second didn't have me staring at a useless PowerPoint presentation. I actually earned my keep during the last meeting. A large batch query some fool devised was taking too long to execute every night. I looked it over, devised an index, broke it into 2 queries, and brought it down to a 30-second job. Not bad for processing a couple 100 million rows. To me, it was a no-brainer. To the moron who coded the initial query, I was a lifesaver. His first attempt ran over 3 hours, essentially multiple full table scans with heavy temporary table creation. I accepted the praise and kept my secrets to myself. Sometimes I was good at being an a-hole. I was back at my desk around 3 when the phone rang. Damon Richardson, I answered. Damon, it's Rebecca. I cringed and let out a breath. I didn't hear any sirens in the background, so maybe my place wasn't on fire. I can't reach my sister. I've tried a bunch of times, but she hasn't called me back. Do you think you can drive me to a hotel when you get back? My jaw released and I flexed it. The idea she was still at my house was not a bad one. In fact, it was kind of nice. Why don't you make dinner and spend the night? I offered in trade. I have 2 bedrooms. Dinner? Rebecca responded. She sounded less than excited about the idea. Sure, I continued. There are noodles in the cabinet above the dishwasher and some jars of spaghetti sauce next to them. I figured boiling water wasn't going to do any serious damage to the house. I shook the possible disasters out of my head. She'll do just fine. Are you sure? I've been here longer than I should already. I smiled to myself. Maybe not long enough. I don't know about you, but I'm starving, I said with a light voice. I missed lunch, and it would be wonderful to have a hot meal waiting when I get home. I suddenly felt like I was talking to my ex, back when we were still talking. My thoughts were a little cross-wired. Okay, I can do spaghetti, Rebecca replied, and I heard the smile in her voice. It brought one to my lips. What time will you be home? Now she sounded like a wife. About 5:30. I'll see you then, Rebecca said cheerfully. I was about to hang up when I heard her voice again. Damon, do you have an old t-shirt I can wear? I'd like to take a shower and wash my clothes. Bottom left-hand drawer of the dresser in my bedroom. Thanks. Why was I so happy she would be home when I got there? So far, knowing her had been a disaster. It has been about 3 hours since she had broken something of mine. Maybe the trend was over. One could always hope. I left work a little early and dropped my broken phone at the store. They said they could flip the SIM card and have a new phone fired up in about 20 minutes. 20 minutes in a phone store feels like a week. I told them I would be back in the morning. At the price I pay for the warranty, you would think they would have a phone fired up and waiting just in case. When I entered the house, my nose was greeted with a heavenly scent. It was spaghetti, but not like it comes out of the jar. This smelled like it had flavor. Rebecca was smiling when I entered the kitchen. She looked simply wonderful in my Stay Puft Marshmallow Man t-shirt. I had to laugh as she modeled it with a little twirl. It was a little short, but covered all the basics. I found your spice rack, Rebecca said proudly. I gave the sauce a little kick. Smells wonderful, nothing seemed to be broken, and there were no flames. Not that I really expected damage, it was just nice that there wasn't any. Is that bread I smell? Yep, hillbilly bread, Rebecca said, then peeked into the oven. It was obviously not done yet since she closed the door and went back to stirring the sauce. Hillbilly bread? I had to ask. Rebecca looked at me and smiled. Regular white bread, a little butter, garlic salt, and sprinkled with cheese. It tastes good with spaghetti. I think that was the smell filling the house. Ingenious. My sister made it for me when I was young, Rebecca said as she peeked into the oven again. This time she grabbed an oven mitt and pulled out a pan of toast. It was golden brown with yellow running through it. She flipped off the oven, which I took to be a very good sign. I think we're ready. What do you want to drink? Why not wine? I have a few bottles and never have a chance to drink them. There are some wine glasses above the stove. I realized the problem with my statement as soon as I said it. Rebecca turned and reached high to open the cupboard. In my mind, I saw broken glass on the stove as she went on her tiptoes. I almost said something, then my eyes shifted. Broken glass no longer concerned me. If you took sexy and mixed it with adorable and painted it blue, it wouldn't come close to the exposed tush I was looking at. The t-shirt had ridden up, and half of Rebecca's tight but was exposed, neatly covered by baby blue panties. Her legs were taut, emphasizing her figure. I felt desire and didn't want to let go of it. My eyes didn't move fast enough when she came down with the glasses. I was caught perving and felt my face flush. I expected an evil look, maybe disappointment. What I saw was a joyous smile and sparkling eyes. Wine? She asked, waving the two glasses she had retrieved. I came out of my fog and gave her an apologetic smile and headed to liquor cabinet. White's Infidel okay? I asked. I had a red also, but felt it might be too dry. Fine with me, you can have anything you want tonight. I turned quickly. I was sure she had emphasized anything. I found her back to me, stirring the sauce. I do believe she was flirting. I closed my eyes and saw the blue panties in my mind. I hoped she was flirting. Dinner went smoothly. We talked about silly stuff, and I steered clear of accidents or any other topic that might ruin our happiness. I hadn't had a pleasant night with a woman in years. I found it warming and comfortable. I had missed the feeling. Linda had done more damage than I first realized. Why the fish? Rebecca asked while sipping her wine. I looked over to my aquarium. Mufasa was lumbering up a hill of coral. It was therapy of sorts, I said truthfully. Everything was coming apart in the divorce, so I decided to build something new. I looked back at Rebecca, who was staring at me intently. If you get close, you can see a small orange and white fish that swims in and out of the little caves. I named him Linda after my ex. He's a clownfish. I'll take your word for it, Rebecca grinned. I have no intention of getting anywhere near the tank. You afraid of fish? I asked, a little perplexed. They should be afraid of me, Rebecca laughed. The tank is lovely, and I want it to stay that way. I looked at her with concern. I think she truly believed she was cursed. You know. I began and was interrupted by the phone ringing. It's probably my sister, Rebecca said, moving quickly to pick it up. I silently hoped it was not. Hello, she said and waited a moment. Who may I say is calling? At least it wasn't her sister. Rebecca covered the speaker side of the phone with her palm and whispered, Linda Barrow, my ex, I said quietly. I don't want to talk to her. I made an ugly face, as if it would painful. Rebecca smiled and nodded. I'm sorry, he can't come to the phone right now, Rebecca said. The sounded sensual. She smiled at my confused look while listening to Linda's response. No, he's, just fine. Why don't you? Call back in about an hour. Oh God, make that two. She hung up, sounding like she was on the verge of an orgasm. I started laughing. She'll know it's bullshit, I said between chuckles. Doesn't matter, Rebecca said, overly proud of herself. She's a woman. Just knowing there's another woman here willing to bullshit her is enough. I laughed again. She was right. Linda would be envious. It was small of me to like the idea, but I liked it nonetheless. Your insurance company called her thinking it was still your number, Rebecca said. She was calling to make sure the accident wasn't serious. Knowing Linda, she was more likely hoping it was very serious. Well, you were wonderful, I said, tipping my wine glass toward her. And the meal was wonderful. That smile again. I walked around the counter and started collecting the dishes. It took us only a moment before we were in a cleaning sink. I washed and Rebecca dried. We had a tendency to touch each other more than necessary. I enjoyed being close to someone again. My mind wandered to the fact I had known Rebecca for less than a day. Most of it was more nasty than nice. She started humming as she dried, seemingly comfortable being next to me. I wondered if my thinking was skewed. I hadn't been with a woman in a while, and Rebecca was cute, well, beautiful. I wanted to Linda came to mind. She was beautiful to me once and didn't come with a host of problems. We finished the dishes and Rebecca pulled the full garbage bag out of the can and tied it off. "In the garage?" she asked, holding up the full bag. "Let me take it," I said. "It's pickup day tomorrow, so I have to haul the can out to the curb anyway." "I'll take it out," Rebecca smiled. "It's the least I can do." I shrugged my shoulders and allowed her the labor. "Thanks." Rebecca hummed her way to the garage and pushed the opener button. There was a loud snap, followed by an even louder crash that echoed through the house. I stood, surprised for a second, until Rebecca's cry brought me to reality. I rushed toward the garage. The washer and dryer unit was leaning forward in the utility room. A large metal spring was protruding through the wall and had put a large dent in the upper dryer. Rebecca was kneeling on the floor of the garage crying. A thin layer of dust was in the air. The garage door was a foot high on one side and off the guides and down to the ground on the other. The old spring mechanism on the right side had failed and snapped off its support violently and driven itself into the far wall. "I'm sorry," Rebecca cried, her head in her hands. "I'm sorry." She was rocking strangely back and forth. "Are you okay?" I asked as I knelt down to her. The damn spring could have killed her. "I'll leave," Rebecca continued. "I don't want to wreck anything else." She was still rocking, which really disturbed me. I wrapped my arm around her and tried to pull her close. She fought me, so I let go. "You didn't do anything. The damn thing just gave out." I struggled to get her to her feet. She was shaking terribly. There was blood on the right side of her forehead. "You're bleeding. Come inside and let me look at it." She looked up at me, her eyes tearing like rivers. I could see the defeat on her face, and I hated it. It bothered me more than my car, my jeans, or my damn phone. I desperately wanted it off her face. I was at a loss, so I cradled her face with my hands and I kissed her. Her lips were yielding, and I could feel her despair. I don't know what I intended, but to linger wasn't planned. My hands slowly entwined into her hair as my lips refused to release her. I felt her surrender and tasted her tears as she tilted her head to better meet my lips. Her lips became stronger. Her hand found the back of my neck. I wanted to live there, in my broken garage. I broke your house," Rebecca whispered into my mouth. "My house almost broke you. I would have burned it down if it had." Rebecca pulled herself closer, more tightly. "I don't want to sleep in the extra room," Rebecca breathed into my ear. I felt her body heat mine. To hell with the stupid garage. I brought her inside and closed the door. I looked at the large spring poking through the wall. It wasn't going anywhere. I sat Rebecca on the couch. My kiss had stopped her tears, though she was still shaken. I retrieved a washcloth and some antiseptic spray. I filled a glass with water and sat down next to her. I had her lie down, her head in my lap. She obeyed without question. She had become completely submissive. I dipped the cloth in water and began to lightly dab the wound. It wasn't deep, and there wasn't any foreign material in it. Some piece must have just flown off when the spring snapped. Rebecca turned her head slightly to give me better access.